My daughter-in-law pointed at me in front of the judge and said, "This old woman only knows how to waste what she doesn't deserve." She was demanding the entire fortune my husband had left me in his will. The judge nodded, and her lawyer smiled, confident of victory. Then I said 3 words that made the judge turn pale. "Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story." The courtroom was old, dark, and suffocating. It smelled of floor wax and old leather-bound books, a heavy, dusty smell that I felt in the back of my throat. It was the smell of men and of a power that had never been mine. I sat alone in the front row, my back straight, my hands clasped in my lap. I was 70 years old, a widow, and for the first time in my life, a public spectacle. On the witness stand, my daughter-in-law Celine was putting on a masterful performance. She was 34, dressed in a custom-tailored, funereal black suit that must have cost $5,000. Her grief was a costume, and she wore it well. A black lace handkerchief was clutched in her hand, and she dabbed at eyes that were, I noted with a clinical detachment, perfectly, impressively dry. "It's not about the money, Your Honor," she said, her voice a practiced, theatrical break. "It's about the legacy." Her lawyer, a slick, arrogant man in a suit that was too shiny, nodded gravely. "And what is that legacy, Mrs. Sterling?" Celine turned, her face a mask of tragic, righteous duty. She pointed a long, manicured, accusatory finger directly at me. "That legacy," she said, her voice rising, "was built by a genius, my late great-father-in-law, Robert Sterling, and his son, my husband Franklin, was supposed to carry it on, but now, she turned back to the judge, her eyes full of fake tears. "Now it is in the hands of her, and she is burning it. She only knows how to waste what she doesn't deserve." The accusation hung in the dead, quiet air of the courtroom. The gallery, filled with my husband's old friends and business rivals, murmured. They were agreeing. My son Franklin had been dead for 6 months, my husband, Robert, for a year. And in that time, this woman, this child, had, with the help of her shark of a lawyer, managed to convince the entire city that I was a senile, incompetent, wasteful fool, who had stumbled into a fortune. She was demanding the court set aside Robert's will, a will that left everything, his entire empire, to me and put the entire estate into a protective trust. A trust that would be managed, of course, by her. "She is a danger to the estate, Your Honor," Celine's lawyer said, his voice dripping with false concern. "A danger to her own grandchild's future. We are just asking the court to protect the Sterling legacy from the one person who seems determined to destroy it." The lawyer, Mr. Harrison, smiled, a slick, confident expression. He was a predator who knew he had the scent of blood. He knew he was winning, and he was winning, because he was telling a story that everyone in this room, everyone in this city already believed. He turned his smile to the man on the bench. Judge Elias Thorne. Judge Thorne was 68, a highly respected, old money pillar of the community. He was part of the city's black elite, a man whose family had had wealth for 3 generations. He was not a corrupt man. He was, I knew, a man of integrity, but he was also a man, and he was a man who knew, or thought he knew, the public narrative of my life. He knew Robert Sterling. He had served on 2 charity boards with him. He had been to our goals. He had seen Robert, my brilliant, charismatic, handsome Robert, command a room with his wit and his booming, confident voice. He had seen Robert as the genius, the empire builder, the pillar. And he had seen me. He had seen me in glittering designer gowns, on Robert's arm. He had seen me playing the part I had chosen, the part of the beautiful, charming, supportive trophy wife. The socialite, the hostess, the one who planned the parties, but never ever spoke at them. And now, he was looking at me, this 70-year-old widow, with open, profound, and deeply condescending pity. He nodded as Harrison spoke. He nodded as Celine cried. He was buying the entire insulting performance. "Your Honor," Harrison continued, "the world knows the genius of Robert Sterling. He built the Sterling Group from nothing. He was a financial wizard, and like many great men, he had a soft spot. He gestured to me, his hand open. He adored his wife. We all did. She was the perfect hostess, the perfect mother. But a financial steward, a CEO, Your Honor, she is tragically incompetent." Celine, on the stand, sniffled. "It's true. Since Robert, and then my Franklin passed, she's been erratic. She's spending money we don't even have. She's just lost. My son Robert's only grandson, his legacy, it's all he has, and she is wasting it on parties." The lawyer smiled again. Sensing the kill, he had painted the perfect, tragic picture. The brilliant man, dead. The responsible, grieving daughter-in-law fighting to protect his legacy. And the senile, flighty trophy wife dancing on his grave. The judge looked at his notes. He looked at me, and he nodded. "I must say, counsel," the judge said, his voice a deep, pitying baritone, "the evidence you've presented is deeply concerning." Celine's lawyer smiled, confident of victory. They were all fools. They were all, every single one of them, staring at a ghost story and believing it was real. I sat there, my hands still, my back straight, and I listened. I listened to them call me erratic. I listened to them call me incompetent. I listened to them call my brilliant, wonderful but utterly clueless late husband a genius. The irony was so sharp, so bitter, it was almost funny. They thought I was a trophy wife. They thought I had spent the last 40 years of my life planning parties and raising my son. I had done both of those things, and I had done them exceptionally well. But that was not my job. That was my cover. The truth was that Robert Sterling, my beloved, charismatic, wonderful husband, was a history professor. He was a brilliant academic with a poet's soul, but he could not balance a checkbook. He didn't build an empire. He didn't even know how. I did. I was not a socialite. I was a mathematics and economics prodigy. I had graduated from Howard at 19. Summa cum laude, with a mind for numbers that scared my professors. I had gone to work for a small, brutal, unnamed firm in the 70s. A place that didn't care I was a woman or black, as long as I made them money. I met Robert. He was 30. I was 25. He was all charm and poetry. I was all cold, hard, ruthless calculation. We fell in love, and I made my first $10 million before he even got tenure. But I was a strategist, and I was a realist. I knew in the 1970s and 80s that a black woman in high finance was invisible. I could get a meeting, but I could never get respect. I could never get in the room. But Robert, my handsome, charming, brilliant Robert, with his deep voice and his easy, confident laugh, he could get in any room. So, we made a deal. We built a partnership. A silent, ghost partnership. He would be the face. He would be the genius. He would be the pillar of the community. And I would be the ghost. I would be the one who ran the numbers. I would be the one making every trade, every deal, every decision. For 40 years he was the beloved public face of the Sterling Group. And I was the one who built it. He was the king. I was the kingdom. And this sniveling, greedy, short-sighted child on the stand was accusing me of incompetence. She was, in effect, telling the shark that it didn't know how to swim. The will Robert had left me, it wasn't a gift. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a transfer. It was the final legal binding act of his partnership with me, returning 100% of the public-facing shares of my company back to its one true and only owner. Celine's lawyer was still droning on. He was talking about the Sterling Group. The Sterling Group, Your Honor, is a complex, multi-billion-dollar entity. It requires a steady, experienced hand. Not, he gestured to me, an emotional, frivolous one. I had to suppress a smile. The Sterling Group, he said it with such reverence. The Sterling Group was a dollhouse. It was a pretty public-facing, clean entity I had built for Robert to play with. It was the nice part of the business. The real estate, the philanthropy, the blue-chip stocks. It was a division. The real company, the real money, the real power, was not called the Sterling Group. It was called Apex Strategic Holdings. I had founded it in 1978. Its name was deliberately, aggressively boring. It was a legal entity with no public face, no website, no press releases, and as far as the world was concerned, no employees. It was just a name on a few, very quiet, very powerful bank accounts and deeds. Apex was the company I used. Apex was the ghost. While Robert was giving speeches at galas, I as Apex was executing hostile takeovers. While Robert was being named Man of the Year, I as Apex was gutting and restructuring failing transport companies for billions in profit. The judge, Elias Thorne, was part of that old money elite. He was a man of finance. He would know the legends of our city's financial history. And the biggest legend of the 1980s was the ghost of Apex. In 1982, a ghost company from out of nowhere had surgically and in total anonymity acquired a 51% controlling stake in the Mid-Atlantic Transport Fund. It was a company 3 times its size run by old white racist money, and this ghost had bought it, leveraged its own assets to buy it, and then sold it for parts in less than 6 months. It was a move so ruthless, so brilliant, and so anonymous that men like Judge Thorne still talked about it in hushed, reverent tones at their clubs. They called the unknown entity the ghost. They had no idea the ghost was a 70-year-old black woman sitting in their courtroom being called incompetent. Celine was fighting for the dollhouse. She had no idea that the real fortress existed, and that I was its queen. My son. My dear sweet blind son. Franklin. He was the one part of this I still grieved. He had been a wonderful boy and a kind man, but he was in all things his father's son. He had all of Robert's charm and none of my calculation. He too had believed the lie. He adored his father, the genius. He loved me, his socialite mother. He was the blind prince. He grew up in the empire, but he never, not once, bothered to ask how the bricks were laid. It was just there. It was, I admit, my one great failing. I had protected him too much. I had wrapped him in the cotton wool of our wealth, just as Robert had. I had wanted his life to be easy. I had not wanted him to see the ghost part of my work, the blood and the math and the 20-hour days. I had wanted him to just be happy. And he had been. I had created a VP of Community Relations job for him at the Sterling Group. It was a no-show job. A title, a corner office, a massive salary which I of course paid from Apex. All so he could feel important. So he could feel like he was part of his father's legacy. And then he met Celine. I spotted her immediately. I had seen her type 1,000 times. A classic gold digger, but a smart one. She wasn't just after the money. She was after the name, the legacy. She didn't want to be rich. She wanted to be a Sterling. She saw me not as a person but as an obstacle. A doting, foolish old woman who would in her mind waste the money that rightfully belonged to Franklin and thus to her and their future children. She was already planning her life as the matriarch. And then, the tragedies. First Robert, peaceful in his sleep. His heart, after 75 years of brilliant, charming life, just stopped. The will, as we had planned 40 years ago, was simple. Everything, all public assets of the Sterling Group, transferred 100% to me. It was a formality, a closing of the books. Then 6 months later, the accident. Franklin, a ski trip, an avalanche. Instant. The grief was a black hole. It swallowed me, and in that darkness, that vulnerability, Celine saw her opportunity. With Franklin gone, she was no longer the wife of the heir. She was the mother of the last Sterling, her 2-year-old son Robert II. She immediately painted herself as the protector of the legacy. She began telling everyone, our friends, that she was worried about me, that I was grieving and erratic, that I was incompetent to manage the great Robert Sterling's empire. And now, here we were. She was demanding the court declare me senile so she, the 34-year-old true heir, could take control. Mr. Harrison, Celine's lawyer, was now pacing in front of the judge. He was on a roll and he was beginning his closing argument. This was the peak of the humiliation. Let's review the evidence of this management, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The evidence of Mrs. Sterling's incompetence. He clicked a button. A giant screen lit up behind him. It was Exhibit A. A bank statement. You'll see here, Your Honor, a single charge from 3 months ago. A charge for $500,000. A gasp went through the courtroom. $500,000, Your Honor. Just gone. And for what? He clicked. A party. I closed my eyes. It was a party. It was the annual fundraising gala for the Robert Sterling Children's Hospital wing. A wing I had founded and I had funded in my husband's name for 20 years. He was framing my philanthropy as frivolous spending. And that's not all. Harrison clicked again. Exhibit B, erratic donations. A $2.5 million donation just 2 months ago to Howard University. He let the name hang in the air. Now Robert Sterling, as we all know, was a proud Yale man. Howard was her alma mater. She is, as you can see, emotionally and erratically redirecting the Sterling legacy to her own vain pursuits. Wasting it. I didn't move. That $2.5 million was to endow the Robert Sterling Chair of American History, the department he had loved and taught in before he joined my company. It was a tribute, and this insect, was painting it as vanity. And finally, Your Honor, Harrison said, his voice dropping as if in mourning, Exhibit C, the most tragic proof of her incompetence. A stock trade. He pulled up a brokerage statement. You will see here on October 10th, Mrs. Sterling, acting as head of the estate, sold 50,000 shares of a blue-chip pharmaceutical stock. A stock Robert Sterling had held for 30 years. A pillar of the portfolio. She just liquidated it. For no reason, like a child emptying a piggy bank. The courtroom was murmuring. This was the final nail. A 30-year-old stock, sold. It was the act of a madwoman. I almost smiled. I, as Apex, had gotten a tip from a source deep inside the FDA. I knew that company's flagship drug was about to fail its phase 3 trial. I sold every share at its absolute peak. The day before the news broke, I had saved the estate $40 million. 3 days later, that blue-chip stock was worth less than a postage stamp. But they didn't know that. They just saw the sale. The evidence is clear, Harrison said, his arms wide. She is a silly, emotional, grieving old woman, burning through a fortune she does not understand. She is incompetent. She is wasteful. She is, in a word, a danger. The petitioner, Judge Thorne said, his voice grave, calls Mrs. Vivian Sterling to the stand. My knees did not shake. My hands did not tremble. I stood, smoothed the front of my simple, elegant, black silk suit, and walked to the stand. I was a 70-year-old woman, but I was not weak. I had run a multi-billion-dollar corporation, in secret for 40 years. I had faced down men who would have eaten Harrison for breakfast. I took the oath. I sat. Harrison approached me, his smile like a shark's. He was handling me, the trophy wife. His voice was slow, loud, and deeply condescending, as if speaking to a child or a senile old woman. Mrs. Sterling, he began, thank you for joining us. I know this must be very confusing for you. I am not confused, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. His smile flickered. Of course. Mrs. Sterling, can you even tell me what a stock is? In your own words. The courtroom titters. Yes, I said. It is a security that represents the ownership of a fraction of a corporation. Very good, he said, as if I were a parrot who had just recited a line. And can you tell us, in your 40 years of marriage to the genius Robert Sterling, did you ever attend a single board meeting for the Sterling Group? No, I said. I did not. A louder murmur. Celine from her seat smirked and sadly shook her head at her lap. You never attended a board meeting, Harrison repeated, letting it sink in. So, is it true, Mrs. Sterling, that you spent the majority of your 40-year marriage planning parties? The humiliation was a physical thing. He had reduced my entire life, my partnership, my work, to catering. I looked at him. I looked at the judge. I looked at Celine. They were all waiting, so sure of the answer. Yes, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice calm. I planned many parties. And they were, if I may say so, spectacular. The lawyer laughed. The courtroom laughed. Even the judge cracked a small, pitying smile. They were laughing at me. The silly old woman had just admitted it. I see, Harrison said, wiping a fake tear of mirth. Spectacular. I have no further questions for this witness. Your Honor. He walked back to his table, a conquering hero. He had proven his point. I was, in my own words, just a party planner. Mr. Harrison, his face aglow with the light of his own perceived brilliance, walked to the center of the courtroom. He had rested his case. He had, in his mind, painted a perfect, undeniable portrait of a doting, senile old woman, who was now tragically a clear and present danger to her own legacy. He clasped his hands behind his back, puffed out his chest, and began his closing argument. Your Honor, he said, his voice dripping with a false heavy sympathy that turned my stomach. We are not here today to punish Mrs. Vivian Sterling. We are here as compassionate and responsible fiduciaries to protect her. We are here to protect the legacy of a great man, Robert Sterling. A titan, a genius. He began to pace, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. And what is that legacy? It is the Sterling Group. An empire built from scratch. And what did we see today? We saw that this empire is now being managed by a woman who, God bless her, plans parties. A few people in the gallery, my supposed friends, tittered nervously. Mr. Harrison has shown us the proof, he continued, gesturing to the evidence board. Exhibit A, a $500,000 charge, for a gala, $500,000, Your Honor, burned in a single night of frivolous self-aggrandizement, while my client, Miss Celine Sterling, the mother of Robert's only grandson, is forced to live in fear of their future being squandered. Exhibit B, he said, his voice rising. A $2.5 million donation to Howard University. Now we all know Robert Sterling was a proud Yale man. His entire life was dedicated to that institution. This is not a donation, Your Honor. This is an erratic and emotional act of vanity. She is redirecting her late husband's legacy to her old alma mater against his wishes. He was painting a picture of me as a traitor, a woman defiling the sacred memory of her husband. And finally, he said, his voice dropping to a low, mournful tone, Exhibit C, the most tragic proof of all, the liquidation, the insane, erratic, childlike sale of 50,000 shares of a blue-chip stock. A stock Robert Sterling himself held for 30 years. A pillar of the portfolio, gone, wiped out, on a whim, because she, liked a different company better. He shook his head, as if in mourning for the stock itself. She is, as she admitted herself, incompetent. She is a socialite. She is a merry widow. She is, tragically, wasting the legacy her son, the late, great Franklin Sterling, and his son Robert II, deserve. We are demanding, Your Honor, that the will of Robert Sterling be set aside. We demand that this court in its wisdom place the entire estate in a protective trust to be administered by the only person who has shown she is responsible. Grieving and clear-eyed, my client, Mrs. Celine Sterling, the true heir. He smiled. A final, confident, predatory smile. He had won. He sat down. Celine was actually truly crying now. Tears of pure greedy joy. She had done it. She had won the lottery. Judge Elias Thorne took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, his face a mask of profound, weary responsibility. He looked at Celine with sympathy. Then he looked at me. And his face, it was the final, devastating blow. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was pity. He pitied me. He saw me exactly as Harrison and Celine did. A confused, old, trophy wife who had lost her anchor and was now just drifting. Mrs. Sterling, he began, his voice a deep paternalistic baritone that made my skin crawl. Vivian, I knew your husband. Socially, of course. I served on the museum board with him. A great man, a brilliant man, a pillar of our community. I myself made my first major investment in the Sterling Group in 1985. On his reputation alone, he was a genius. He sighed, putting his glasses back on. And I must agree with Mr. Harrison. The evidence presented today is deeply concerning. Celine let out a small, quiet sob, a perfect performance of vindicated grief. Your spending habits since your husband's passing, the judge continued, looking at his notes, they do appear erratic. They appear emotional. A $500,000 gala, a $2.5 million donation that seems on its face to be a vain project, and the liquidation of a 30-year legacy stock. These are not the actions of a prudent financial steward. These are the actions of someone who is, as you said, Mr. Harrison, incompetent. My blood, which I thought was ice, was now fire. Incompetent. I am, frankly, the judge said, I am leaning toward granting the petitioner's request. I believe Mr. Harrison is correct. The estate must be protected. Celine's lawyer Harrison was physically preening. He was already writing his press release in his head. He had beaten the Sterling Empire. He had won. This is not a finding, the judge said. A small legal caveat, but I am prepared to rule. This court's primary duty is to protect the legacy of the deceased, and to protect the heirs. In this case, your grandson Robert II, and that legacy appears to be in peril. He looked at me, one last time with that awful, unbearable pity. Mrs. Sterling, this is of course a formality before I make my ruling, but do you have anything at all to say in your defense? Anything at all? Celine scoffed. A tiny, triumphant sound. Her lawyer looked at his watch, bored. They were waiting for me to cry, to plead, to kneel. I stood up. My legs were not shaking. My hands were not trembling. I smoothed the front of my black silk suit. The courtroom went silent. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice quiet, but clear as a bell. I do. All eyes were on me. I was supposed to be weeping. I was supposed to be the erratic, emotional widow. Instead, I stood at the defense table as if it were a lectern, and I was about to give a speech. Your Honor, I began, my voice calm, Mr. Harrison has painted a very compelling picture. A picture of a silly, wasteful, emotional woman. It's a good story, but it is, in a word, fiction. Harrison jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. She is casting aspersions. Sit down, Mr. Harrison, the judge said, his voice tired. She has a right to speak. Continue, Mrs. Sterling, but I must advise you the evidence. The evidence, I said, cutting him off, my voice hardening just a fraction. Let's talk about the evidence. I looked at the jury box even though there wasn't one. I was in this moment a CEO addressing her board. Mr. Harrison calls my $500,000 party a waste, I said, my voice ringing with a cold, clear authority. He failed to mention in his diligent research that it was the 35th annual gala for the Robert Sterling Children's Hospital wing. A gala that I have chaired for 30 years, and that this frivolous party raised $4.7 million for pediatric cancer research. Is that wasteful, Mr. Harrison? Harrison's mouth snapped shut. The courtroom was silent. He calls my $2.5 million donation to Howard University a vanity project for my alma mater. I continued, and an insult to my husband's scythes. He failed to mention that my husband was a history professor at Howard for 10 years, before he went into business. That donation was to endow the Robert Sterling Chair of American History, his own academic field, at the university where we met. An act of love, Mr. Harrison, not vanity. The judge's face was no longer pitying, it was confused. He was frowning. And finally, I said, Exhibit C. My most tragic act of incompetence, the erratic childlike sale of the pharmaceutical stock. I looked directly at Judge Thorne. Your Honor, I sold those 50,000 shares at 10:15 a.m. on October 10th, at their 52-week high. I did so because I had information that their flagship drug Remuva had failed its Phase 3 FDA trial. Objection, Harrison shouted. How could she possibly? The news of that failure, I said, speaking over him, became public at 4:01 p.m. that same day. The next morning, that 30-year pillar stock opened at 0.12 a share. It was delisted a week later. I let that sink in. Mr. Harrison accuses me of wasting the estate. Your Honor, with that one single erratic sale, I saved the estate $40 million. I didn't waste a legacy. I am the legacy. The courtroom was absolutely stone-cold silent. The judge was staring at me, his frown now one of deep, profound confusion. But, Mrs. Sterling, the judge stammered. How could you possibly have known that? How? Mr. Harrison is correct, I said, but I did not attend the Sterling Group board meetings. They were, as he said, a waste of my time. Harrison scoffed. Your Honor, she's admitting it. I was far too busy, Your Honor, I said, my voice like steel, cutting him off. I was managing the actual company. The Sterling Group? The judge asked. No, Your Honor, I said. The Sterling Group is a dollhouse. A very pretty, very public-facing dollhouse. I was managing Apex Strategic Holdings. Celine and her lawyer looked completely, utterly baffled. Apex what? Harrison whispered to his paralegal, who just shrugged. Objection, Your Honor, relevance. I've never heard of this company. But the judge. Oh, the judge. Judge Elias Thorne's old money face, a moment ago so full of pity, went sheet white. His blood, I could see, had run cold. He didn't just look pale, he looked like he had seen a ghost. He dropped his pen. It clattered loud and sharp in the dead silent courtroom. He knew the name. He leaned forward over the bench, his eyes no longer pitying but wide with a dawning disbelieving, almost terrified awe were locked on me. What did you just say? He whispered, his voice a rasp. Celine was confused. Your Honor, what's wrong? What is she talking about? The judge ignored her. He didn't take his eyes off me. He was no longer a judge looking at a trophy wife. He was a man of finance, a man of the old elite, staring at a living, breathing legend. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said, his voice trembling just slightly. Say that name again. I stood tall. The 70-year-old socialite was gone. The ghost partner was in the room. Apex Strategic Holdings, I repeated, my voice clear and cold. I founded it in 1978. Sole proprietor, Vivian T. Sterling. Me. You, Your Honor, would probably know it by its nickname from the 1980s. I believe the financial papers called me the Ghost of Apex. The judge's jaw dropped. He physically recoiled. My God, he breathed. Your Honor, Harrison was frantic, completely lost. What is this? This is theater. She's making this up. Mr. Harrison, the judge snapped, his voice a low, furious growl. Shut up, you have no idea who you're talking to. Celine, for the first time, looked truly scared. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew, with dawning certainty, that she had just lost. I had their full attention. Mr. Harrison is right, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. My husband was a genius. He was a genius historian, a poet, and the most charismatic man I ever met. But he couldn't balance a checkbook. He was the most wonderful man in the world, but he was not a businessman. So, we made a partnership, I said. In the 1970s, Your Honor, as you well know, a black woman in high finance was a novelty. She was not a player. She could not get in the room, but my Robert, he could get in any room. So, I said, he became the face. I became the ghost. He was the chairman. I was the CEO. He gave the speeches at the galas I planned. I made the deals. I looked directly at Judge Thorne. Your Honor, does the 1982 hostile takeover of the Mid-Atlantic Transport Fund ring a bell? The judge's face, if possible, went even whiter. He knew it. Everyone in his generation knew it. It was the stuff of legend. A ghost company from nowhere had bought out the racist old white boy shipping conglomerate, leveraged its own assets to do it, and then sold it for parts in 6 months for a 4,000% profit. That was you, the judge whispered. That was me, I confirmed. The profits from that one deal were what I used to create the Sterling Group as a public-facing entity for my husband to manage. Robert was the chairman. I was the owner. He gave the speeches, I made the trades. I knew about the pharmaceutical stock, because my contact at the FDA, a woman I put through medical school, called me. I made that $4.7 million for the hospital because I am the one who sits on the actual finance board, not just the party planning committee. The will, I said. Robert didn't leave me the fortune, Your Honor. He returned it. It was a transfer of 100% of the public shares, back to the 100% private owner. The will is just a formality. The entire estate, every brick, every stock, every dollar, has always been mine. Celine was on her feet now, her performance shattered, revealing the raw, greedy, panicking woman beneath. She's lying. This is insane. Robert was the genius. He told me. Franklin told me. She's a liar. The judge ignored Celine's screeching. He was furious, but not at me. He was furious at Harrison. He was furious at himself. Elias Thorne, a pillar of the community, had been so blinded by his own casual, ingrained sexism, that he had pitied me. He had patronized me. He had almost handed my own empire over to a child. Mr. Harrison, he barked, his voice a sudden gavel-like crack that made the lawyer jump. Why yes. Your Honor? Did you? The judge said, his voice low and trembling with rage. At any point in your discovery, bother to look into the source of the Sterling Group's initial capitalization. Did you do any due diligence whatsoever? Or did you just assume, like a 1950s dinosaur, that the man was the genius and the woman was the party planner? Harrison was sputtering. Your Honor, the public record, it's all in Robert's name. The public record, the judge scoffed, his face red with embarrassment. You've been arguing about a dollhouse. You didn't even look for the real company. You came into my courtroom, citing erratic spending from a woman who, he looked at me, with a new, profound and utterly terrified respect, who invented the way this city does business. He slammed his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. This suit is not just dismissed. It is dismissed with extreme prejudice. And you, Mr. Harrison, are an idiot. You have wasted this court's time. You have slandered a pillar of the financial community. And you have, quite frankly, embarrassed yourself and this bar by attempting to tertonize the ghost of Apex. You're lucky she doesn't own your firm too. Your Honor. Get out of my sight, the judge growled. Harrison was pale. He began stuffing his papers into his briefcase, his hands shaking. He was finished. Celine was screaming now. The mask was gone. The performance was over. This was the raw, primal, animalistic rage of a cornered gold digger who had just watched her billion-dollar lottery ticket burst into flames. No, you can't, she shrieked, her face a blotchy, tear-streaked ruin. It's not fair. I'm a Sterling. My son is a Sterling. She owes us. She owes my husband. She owes my son. That money is... It's ours. I stood. I picked up my simple, elegant purse. I smoothed my suit. The show was over. I walked not to the exit but directly past Celine's table. She was sobbing, a broken, pathetic, greedy child. I paused. I looked down at her. You wanted my husband's fortune, Celine, I said, my voice quiet, cold, and for her ears only. But you never, not once, bothered to realize I was the fortune. I looked at Harrison, who was frozen in shame. The case is dismissed. Your 15 minutes of fame are over. And by the way, I am countersuing you and Mr. Harrison's firm for defamation, slander, and the full recovery of all my legal fees. You can't, Celine whispered. I can, I replied. I'm a very erratic woman. I turned and walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking on the marble, leaving them in the ruins of the empire they had tried and failed to steal. I had a gala to plan, and this time I was going to make it spectacular. Thank you for watching.